Welcome to Hidden Wounds. My name is Walter Terry, and at 65 years old, I was convinced I had witnessed every possible shade of human betrayal. I was mistaken. The words still resonate in my memory, as sharp and painful as shards of glass. He is the father I wish I had, unlike you. It was my own son's voice, startlingly clear and deliberate, slicing through the quiet ambiance of what I had believed to be a pleasant family dinner. I sat there, motionless, at the head of my oak dining table, the same table where I had provided for this ungrateful young man for 34 years. My vintage watch, a cherished gift from my own late father, suddenly felt like a lead weight on my wrist. I watched my son's face, alive with a misplaced admiration as he lauded his father-in-law. "Richard is so accomplished, so self-reliant," he went on, either completely unaware of or perhaps savoring the deep wounds his words were inflicting. "He doesn't rely on anyone for help. He built his own empire from the ground up and never once asked his children for a penny." His wife, Jessica, sat beside him, wearing that smug, self-satisfied smile I had come to thoroughly detest. She had undoubtedly orchestrated this entire performance. I was sure of it. This was a calculated public humiliation, staged in my own home, at my own table. I maintained a neutral expression, my breathing even a skill perfected over years of corporate negotiations. But beneath the calm facade, something cold and methodical began to awaken. I thought about the 7-0 that was wired from my bank account to his every month, without fail. It was the money that covered their mortgage, financed their lavish vacations, and sustained their comfortable existence. "That's wonderful, my boy," I said, my voice as smooth and steady as still water. "It must be a privilege to have such a self-made man as a role model." He failed to detect the icy undertone. He never did. Later that evening, long after they had departed, I stood alone in my study. I was surrounded by portraits of my ancestors and the numerous accolades my late wife had earned while building our family's legacy. Moonlight poured through the tall windows, casting long, dark shadows across the oriental rug. I poured myself a glass of scotch, a fine single malt from my private collection, and finally allowed myself to absorb the full impact of what had just transpired. My son had done more than just insult me. He had declared war. I opened my laptop and navigated to my online banking portal. And there it was, the recurring transfer scheduled for the first of the coming month, $7,000. For years, I had justified it to myself as an act of fatherly love. But tonight, I saw it for what it truly was, a weakness he had exploited. With a single click, I deleted the transfer. But that was not enough. Not by a long shot. He operated under the assumption that words were cheap. My son was about to learn that words can be the most expensive currency of all. The following morning, I sat in my study with a fresh cup of coffee and began the task that would redefine my relationship with my son for whatever time remained. I retrieved folder after folder from my filing cabinet, each one a detailed testament to 34 years of enabling his every failure. Let me paint a picture of the man I raised. He was given every advantage. The best private schools, tutors whenever his grades slipped, a new car on his 16th birthday, and a fully funded college education. When he graduated with a mediocre transcript and zero ambition, I used my connections to secure his first job. When he was let go for sheer incompetence, I smoothed things over with the firm and found him another position. At 25, he met Jessica, a manipulative woman who saw our family name and only envisioned dollar signs. She nurtured his profound sense of entitlement, whispering venom in his ear, convincing him I was controlling whenever I suggested he needed to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. The 7-0 monthly allowance began shortly after they were married. "Just until we get on our feet, Dad," he had promised. That was 9 years ago. I had kept meticulous records of everything. Every single payment, every financial bailout, every instance where I had saved him from the consequences of his own foolishness. There was the gambling debt I settled. 12-0 owed to men who would have dealt with him very harshly. There was the substantial tax lien I cleared after he neglected to file his returns for 3 consecutive years. And there was the business loan I had to co-sign, because no financial institution in the city would trust him on his own. And this was my repayment. He held up another man as the father he wished he had. But as I sifted through those files, I uncovered something more. Evidence of actions that went far beyond simple financial irresponsibility. I found forged documents where he had illicitly used my name. I found contracts where he had grossly inflated his credentials, claiming degrees he had never earned and professional experience he did not possess. These were small deceptions that had the potential to escalate into very large problems if they came to the attention of the right people. My son, in his boundless arrogance and stupidity, had left a paper trail that could lead to his complete and utter ruin. I pictured Jessica's smug smile, remembering how she had actively encouraged his cruelty. I thought about the father-in-law he praised so effusively. Would Richard still hold him in such high regard when his entire world came crashing down around him? By midday, my plan was fully formed. That afternoon, when my phone rang and his name flashed on the screen, I let it go straight to voicemail. Then I made a call to my attorney. "Harrison," I said as soon as he answered, "I have a set of documents I need you to prepare for me, and they need to be absolutely ironclad." The seeds of his destruction were about to be sown, and I intended to water them with his own arrogance. It took exactly 3 days for the new reality to sink in. 3 days for him to receive a notification from his bank that the expected monthly deposit had not arrived. I was in my garden, pruning my roses, a hobby that has taught me a great deal about the necessity of cutting away dead wood to allow for new growth. When my phone began to ring incessantly, I simply let it go. Finally, when I was ready, I answered on his 7th attempt. "Dad," his voice was strained, laced with panic. "Something is wrong with the transfer. The money didn't come through." "Oh?" I kept my tone mild, feigning concern. "How peculiar. I've called the bank 3 times. They're telling me there's no automatic transfer scheduled from your account anymore." "Well, that can't be right," I said, injecting a note of deliberate confusion into my voice. "Let me look into it, son." "Dad, I need that money. Our mortgage payment is due tomorrow." Ah, there it was. The raw desperation I had been waiting to hear. "I'm sure it's just a simple computer glitch," I said soothingly. "These things are common with modern technology. I'll give the bank a call first thing in the morning." "Can't you call them now? It's only 4 o'clock. My boy, I'm about to have a drink with the Hendersons. You know how seriously I take my social commitments." I allowed a slight chill to enter my voice. Unlike some people, I don't appreciate having my plans disrupted. He understood the reference to the dinner, but his desperation was too great for him to react with anger. "Please, Dad, just this once. I promise I'll work out a more permanent solution, but for now." "What would your other father think?" I asked quietly. "The one you wish you had. Would he drop everything he was doing to solve your problems for you?" A chasm of silence stretched between us. That was different," he finally stammered. "I was just trying to pay Richard a compliment. I didn't mean. Oh, but you did mean it, I interrupted, my voice remaining perfectly composed. You meant every single word, and words, my dear boy, have consequences. That's a lesson you never managed to learn. I could hear his breathing, rapid and shallow. I'll tell you what, I continued. Come for dinner on Sunday. Bring Jessica. We'll discuss your financial predicament then. But the mortgage, I'm sure Richard would be more than happy to help you out. After all, he's so accomplished and self-reliant. I paused for effect. Unlike some people, I hung up the phone before he could muster a response. That evening, I called Harrison again. Are the documents ready? All prepared, Walter. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this? There's no turning back from it. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of my study window. My silver hair was perfectly combed, my suit immaculate. I looked exactly like what I was, a man of principle and substance who had been pushed beyond his limit. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I said. The trap was set. All I needed now was for him to walk right into it. Sunday dawned gray and cold, a perfect match for my mood. I had spent the morning at Wellington's, the city's finest purveyor of leather goods, choosing the perfect briefcase. It was Italian leather, with brass fittings, the kind of briefcase successful men carry to important meetings. For someone special? The saleswoman had inquired. Very special, I had replied. Someone who is about to receive precisely what he deserves. Back in my study, I arranged the contents of the briefcase with the same meticulous care I once used to plan my wife's business dinners. On top, I placed a thick stack of $100 bills totaling 5. 0 enough to immediately catch his eye and inspire a sense of gratitude. Beneath the cash, sealed in an elegant envelope labeled, "For your future," were the documents that would spell his ruin. Every single forged signature he had ever used in my name. Copies of the fraudulent loan applications, where he had listed me as a reference without my consent. Records of the tax liens, the gambling debts, and the litany of business failures he had carefully concealed from his wife and her precious family. But the most damning evidence of all was proof of the checks he had been writing from the construction company's account. It was a small contracting business I had helped him start, where he was meant to be an equal partner. He had been skimming profits, not large amounts, just a few $100s here and there, enough to buy Jessica expensive jewelry and pay for their weekend trips. But embezzlement is embezzlement, regardless of the sum. I had copies of everything. Bank statements, receipts, even photographs of the jewelry he had purchased with the stolen funds. My private investigator, yes, I had hired 1 month ago when my suspicions first arose, had been exceptionally thorough. The beauty of the plan was its cruel simplicity. He would be carrying the evidence of his own crimes, personally delivered by the hand of his loving father. When they arrived for dinner, he looked haggard. 3 days without the financial safety net he had always taken for granted had clearly taken a toll. Jessica looked annoyed, as if his problems were a personal inconvenience to her. "Dad," he said, kissing my cheek with the false affection he had perfected over decades, "thank you for seeing us." "Of course, my boy," I replied, noting how his gaze immediately locked onto the new briefcase sitting on my coffee table. "Shall we have dinner first?" The meal was excruciating. Jessica prattled on about her father's latest business triumph, a charity gala that had raised over 6 figures for a children's hospital. The irony was almost too much to bear. Her father was a genuinely admirable man, while she had married a common thief who stole from his own business partners. "Richard is truly an inspiration," I said graciously. "It must be wonderful to have such a role model." My son shifted uncomfortably in his seat. After we finished dessert, I gestured toward the briefcase. "I've been thinking about what you said last week," I began, watching his face intently, "about fathers who are truly accomplished and self-reliant." He had the decency to look ashamed, but his eyes never left the briefcase. "I've come to realize that I've been enabling you instead of helping you," I continued. "I've always been there to fix your problems instead of teaching you how to fix them yourself." Jessica's expression sharpened with a hint of alarm. "So, I've decided to give you one final gift," I said, lifting the briefcase and placing it squarely in front of him. "This contains everything you need to become the man you were always meant to be." He opened it with eager hands, his face breaking into a wide smile at the sight of the cash. "Dad, I don't know how to—" "Don't thank me yet," I said softly. "There's more in there than just money. There are documents, very important ones. Study them carefully." I stood up, smoothing the front of my jacket with hands that did not tremble despite the gravity of what I was doing. "I will not be providing any further financial assistance," I announced calmly. "It's time for you to learn what real responsibility looks like." As they left, with him clutching the briefcase, my son actually seemed hopeful. He thought he had won me over with his pathetic, desperate display. He had no idea that he was carrying the very instruments of his own downfall. That night, I made the first of several phone calls. An anonymous tip to the IRS regarding a small construction company whose accounting records didn't seem to add up. A suggestion to the Better Business Bureau that they should verify the credentials of certain local contractors. A quiet word to an old friend whose husband worked in the district attorney's office, mentioning some financial irregularities that might be worth investigating. I went to bed that night and slept more soundly than I had in years. I chose the Meridian Cafe for our final meeting, a place we had frequented in happier times, back when he was a young boy still capable of genuine affection. The irony of the location seemed fitting. He arrived 15 minutes early, clutching the leather briefcase as if it were a lifeline. His appearance had deteriorated even further in the 3 days since our dinner. His usually perfect hair was unkempt, and his expensive shirt was wrinkled. Fear, I observed, was not a good look for him. "Dad," he said, rising awkwardly from his seat as I approached. His relief at seeing me was palpable, and I allowed myself a brief moment to savor it. "Hello, my boy." I clasped his shoulder, noting the slight tremor in his hands as he pulled out my chair for me. "You look tired," I observed. "I haven't been sleeping well," he admitted. "The financial pressure is a lot." "Of course," I said with feigned sympathy, ordering my usual black coffee from the waitress. "It must be quite a challenge to deal with real-world responsibilities for the first time." He winced at the remark, but said nothing. The briefcase sat on the table between us like a sacred artifact. "I've been thinking about our conversation," he began carefully. "About what I said at dinner. I was wrong, Dad. Completely and utterly wrong. You've been more generous and supportive than any son has a right to expect." The words were well chosen, but his eyes kept darting toward the briefcase. He wasn't apologizing. He was negotiating. "I'm glad you've finally come to that realization," I replied coolly. "Though I do wonder what Richard would think of a man who only offers an apology when he's in need of money." His face flushed with color, but his desperation kept his anger suppressed. "I've learned my lesson," he insisted. "I'll be more grateful, more respectful. I promise I'll pay back every single penny you've given us over the years." "With what money?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Your construction company is barely staying afloat." and all of your other business ventures have ended in failure." The bluntness of my assessment seemed to stun him. For 34 years, I had softened the blow of his failures with gentle words and euphemisms. Not anymore. "I'll figure something out," he said weakly. "Maybe Richard. Richard won't give you a dime," I finished for him. "Because he is actually accomplished and self-reliant, remember? He didn't build his empire by bailing out grown men who refused to stand on their own 2 feet. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to just above a whisper. "But I have something that might help you," I said, placing my hand on the briefcase. "Inside this case are documents that could change everything for you. Your future, your reputation, your entire standing in this community." His eyes widened with a mixture of hope and greed. "However," I continued, "what you do with them is entirely up to you. I am finished being your safety net, my boy. From this day forward, you either sink or you swim on your own merits." I stood up from the table, leaving enough money to cover my untouched coffee. I watched him struggle with the weight of the briefcase as he rose to follow me out. "Dad, thank you," he said, his voice thick with what I assume he believed was genuine emotion. "I won't let you down." "No," I agreed, patting his cheek one last time. "You won't, because I will no longer be in a position to be let down." As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in decades. Behind me, I could hear him fumbling with his phone, most likely calling his wife to share the wonderful news about his inheritance. Let him have his moment of celebration. By tomorrow morning, the anonymous tips I had placed would begin to bear fruit. Investigators would start asking questions. Records would be subpoenaed. Audits would be scheduled. And my son, carrying the very evidence that would condemn him, would have nowhere left to run. The hunter had become the hunted, and he had no idea the season had already begun. For a week, I observed from a distance as my son paraded around town with his new briefcase, playing the part of a successful businessman. He had lunch at the country club, made a great show of taking important meetings, and even bought Jessica a new bracelet to celebrate their supposed change in fortune. I knew all of this because I had asked Mrs. Davis, my longtime housekeeper and an impeccable source of neighborhood information, to keep her ears open. The small, affluent social circle we moved in made privacy an impossibility, a fact I used to my full advantage. "He's been bragging to anyone who will listen," she reported to me over my morning coffee, telling people his father finally recognized his business acumen and made him a full partner in the family's investments. A partner? The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking, even for him. But on the 8th day, the first crack appeared in his carefully constructed facade. I was in my conservatory arranging orchids when my phone rang. It was Harrison, my attorney. "They've taken the bait," he said without any preamble. "The district attorney's office called this morning. They want to schedule a meeting about the information that was anonymously submitted regarding the East Side Construction Company. They've also received tips about fraudulent loan applications and tax irregularities. Someone has been very thorough in their research." "And how thorough is thorough?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Thorough enough to warrant a full-scale audit and a criminal investigation. Your son is going to be questioned under oath about financial discrepancies dating back at least 5 years. I felt a quiet flutter of satisfaction, like a gardener seeing the first green shoots emerge after planting seeds in the spring. That afternoon, the second blow fell. Mrs. Davis called while I was at my club. "Mr. Terry," she said, her voice buzzing with the thrill of fresh scandal, "you will never believe what just happened. Government people showed up at your son's office with boxes and clipboards. They wouldn't let anyone leave for 2 hours. A financial audit, right on schedule. By evening, the third and final shoe had dropped. My son called, his voice tight with a panic he could barely control. "Dad, something has happened. There's been some kind of terrible mistake with my business records. Investigators came to the office today, asking all sorts of questions about tax filings and bank deposits." "How strange," I murmured, watching the sunset paint my garden in hues of gold and crimson. What did they want to know? Everything. They wanted to see all of our contracts, all of our financial statements. They asked about personal expenses that might have been charged to the business. Ah, the embezzlement. They were looking right where I had hoped they would look first. "I'm sure it's just a routine procedure," I said calmly. "Successful businesses get audited all the time." "But Dad, they seem to know things, specific things, like someone had given them detailed inside information about our operations." The paranoia was setting in beautifully. In my experience, guilty people always suspect betrayal because, deep down, they know they deserve it. "Who on earth would do such a thing?" I asked with practiced innocence. "I don't know, but Dad, I might need some help. Legal help, financial help. If this goes badly." "I'm sure Richard would be happy to assist," I said sweetly. "He's so accomplished and self-reliant after all." The silence on his end of the line was deafening. "Please," he said finally, his voice cracking. "I know I hurt you. I know I was ungrateful, but I'm still your son." "Yes," I agreed. "You are. And as your father, I gave you everything you needed to become an honorable man. What you chose to do with those gifts is entirely your own responsibility." I hung up before he could respond, but not before I heard the beginning of what sounded distinctly like a sob. When a house is infested with termites, you don't need to knock it down. You simply let it rot from the inside out. The rot was spreading faster than even I had anticipated. Within 2 weeks, my son's carefully curated life began to collapse in earnest. The financial audit had uncovered not only the embezzlement I was aware of, but also additional irregularities his business partner had known nothing about. Worse, the forged documents he had used over the years, many of which were now neatly filed in that elegant leather briefcase, had created a complex web of liability that stretched far beyond my original plan. I learned the latest details over lunch with Bill Whitman, an old friend whose wife served on the City Planning Commission. They found contracts worth nearly 200. 0 that were signed using credentials he doesn't even possess. Bill whispered, his eyes bright with the thrill of the scandal. Apparently, he claimed to have an engineering degree from Stanford. The university has no record of him ever attending, not even for a semester. "How dreadful," I murmured, cutting into my salmon with surgical precision. "But here's the truly delicious part," Bill continued, leaning forward conspiratorially. "His father-in-law, Richard, you know, the successful businessman, he has completely cut ties with them, won't return their calls. He even had his attorney send a cease and desist letter, telling them to stop using his name in any of their business dealings." The irony was so perfect. It felt as though it had been orchestrated by a higher power. The very man my son had held up as his ideal had abandoned him the moment his troubles became public. That evening he appeared on my doorstep. I had been anticipating this visit, yet I was still taken aback by his appearance. In just 3 weeks, he had aged a full decade. His skin was gray, and his usually perfect hair was unwashed and unkempt. The expensive suit he used to wear had been replaced by wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt that had seen better days. "Dad," he said when I opened the door, "please, I need to come in." I considered refusing, but my curiosity won out. I wanted to witness the full extent of his fall from grace. He followed me into my sitting room, where I poured myself a glass of sherry and offered him nothing. He was no longer a guest in my home. He was a supplicant. "They've frozen all of our accounts," he began without any preamble. "The house is going into foreclosure. Jessica has moved back in with her parents." "With her father?" I asked with genuine interest. "The one you admire so much?" He flinched as if I had struck him. "He won't even speak to me," he continued. "Her father convinced her that I'm a liability to their family's reputation. They're talking about divorce." I sipped my sherry and waited. "Dad, I know I hurt you. I know I was disrespectful and ungrateful, but surely you can't want this for me. I'm facing criminal charges. I could go to prison." "Could you?" I asked with mild interest. "And for what crimes, precisely?" "You know what crimes," he said, his voice rising with desperation. "Tax evasion, fraud, embezzlement. The investigators have documents, evidence. Someone gave them everything they needed to destroy me." I met his gaze calmly. "And what makes you think I would know anything about that?" For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of the intelligent child he had once been. His eyes narrowed as the disparate pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. "The briefcase," he said slowly. "The documents you gave me, they weren't for my future. They were evidence." "Were they?" I asked, setting down my glass with deliberate care. "I suppose you would know better than anyone what was in there." The full, horrifying realization hit him like a physical blow. He actually staggered backward, gripping the back of a chair for support. "You did this," he whispered. "You destroyed me." "I did nothing," I replied with perfect composure. "You destroyed yourself years ago with your lies and your theft and your arrogance. I simply stopped preventing the natural consequences of your choices from catching up with you." He stared at me as if he were seeing me for the very first time. "I'm your son," he said, his voice breaking. "Yes," I agreed. "You are. And I gave you every advantage, every opportunity to become a man of honor. Instead, you chose to become a thief and a liar who publicly humiliated the man who gave him life." I stood, my hands perfectly steady. "Now, you are going to learn what Richard already knew, that success and respect are not given, they are earned. And you, my dear boy, have earned exactly what you are now receiving." I walked to the front door and opened it. "Goodbye," I said simply. He walked past me like a broken man. From my window, I watched him climb into a car that was likely just weeks away from being repossessed. I hadn't destroyed him. I had simply handed him the rope, and he had tied the knot all by himself. The indictments came down on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. By noon, the local newspaper's website had published a detailed article outlining the charges against a local contractor accused of widespread fraud and embezzlement. They used his photograph from the country club's directory, the same photo where he was smiling confidently in his expensive suit, back in the days when he believed his father's money made him untouchable. I read the article over my morning coffee, noting the thoroughness of the investigation. The district attorney's office had constructed a remarkably comprehensive case against him. Tax evasion, mail fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement from his own company. The charges painted a vivid picture of a man whose entire adult life had been built upon a foundation of deceit. Mrs. Davis arrived for her weekly duties just as I was finishing the article. "Oh, Mr. Terry," she said, her voice heavy with manufactured sympathy. Have you seen the news about your son?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "It's all quite shocking. The phone has been ringing all morning. Reporters asking for statements. Neighbors calling with questions. I told them all you weren't available for comment." "Thank you, Mrs. Davis. That was very wise. I had no intention of speaking to the press about my son's disgrace. A gentleman does not air his family's failures in public, even when those failures are not truly his to claim. But I did make a point of attending the Whitmore's charity luncheon that Friday, just 3 days after the story broke. I wore my Navy suit and my grandfather's signet ring, projecting the image of dignified strength that I had perfected over decades of social obligations. The whispers followed me through the room like a ship's wake. Conversations would halt as I approached, then resume in hushed tones as I passed. I was the father of the scandal, the man whose son had fallen so spectacularly from grace. I held my head high and greeted everyone with perfect composure. Bill Whitman approached me during the cocktail hour, his face a mask of practiced concern. "Walter, how are you holding up, my friend? This must be terribly difficult for you." "Thank you for asking, Bill," I replied serenely. "It has certainly been educational, learning the full extent of his deception." "You mean you didn't know?" "I knew he was irresponsible with money," I said, choosing my words with care. "I simply didn't realize that his irresponsibility had crossed the line into criminality. It wasn't entirely a lie. I had known about the embezzlement and the forged documents, but the full scope of his fraud had surprised even me. The investigators had uncovered schemes I had never suspected, including the use of fake invoices and phantom employees on the construction company's payroll. Still," Bill persisted, "to see your own child's name in the newspaper like that, I see it as a confirmation that justice, in its own way, still exists," I said calmly. "Some people are raised to believe they are above consequences. It's a healthy, if painful experience, for them to learn otherwise." The stark honesty of my response seemed to shock him into silence. Later that evening, as I was reading in my study, the phone rang. I recognized the number on the caller ID immediately, the county jail. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally played the message hours later, my son's voice was barely recognizable. Hoarse, broken, and desperate. "Dad, please, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I'm in jail. They've set my bail at 500. I need help. Please, I'm begging you. I'll do anything to make this right." I deleted the message before it had finished playing. He had praised another man as the father he wished he had. Well, now he could see how that ideal father would respond to his crisis. Richard hadn't posted his bail. He hadn't hired any attorneys. He hadn't even taken his phone calls. He had shown my son exactly what responsible, successful men do when faced with grown children who make catastrophically poor choices. They let them face the consequences alone. 6 months after his arrest, my son was released on bail, funded, as I later learned through the social grapevine, by a desperate loan taken out against the few remaining assets of his construction company. His former partner had dissolved the business and was now pursuing his own civil lawsuit against my son for the money that had been stolen from their joint accounts. He appeared at my door on a gray February morning, looking like a ghost of the man who had once sat at my dinner table and insulted me. The weight loss was dramatic, at least 30 pounds, leaving his expensive clothes hanging on his frame like empty sacks. His hair, once a source of great pride for him, was streaked with premature gray and badly in need of a cut. But it was his eyes that revealed the true extent of the damage. The confident arrogance was gone, replaced by the haunted look of a man who has discovered that the world can be a very cruel place for those who lack protection. "Dad," he said when I opened the door. His voice was barely a whisper. I didn't invite him inside, but he didn't seem to expect me to. Instead, he just stood on my doorstep like a beggar seeking alms. "I wanted to apologize," he began, his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. "Not because I want anything from you. I know that's over, but because I need you to know that I finally understand what I did to you." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I spent my entire life taking your love for granted," he said. "I thought that being your son entitled me to everything you had worked for. I mistook your support for weakness, your generosity for an obligation." A single tear rolled down his gaunt cheek. And then, when I felt I needed to prove to Richard that I was worthy of his daughter, I threw you away as if you meant nothing. I held up another man as my ideal while mocking the one person who had given me everything. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, a gesture so childlike it might have moved me at one time. "I know you did this to me," he said quietly. "I know you were the one who gave them the evidence that destroyed my life." I met his eyes steadily but said nothing. "And I know I deserved it," he whispered. "Every single bit of it. The humiliation, the financial ruin, the criminal charges, all of it." He took a shaky breath. "But I want you to know that I finally understand what I lost. It wasn't just your money, not just your support. I lost my father. I lost the one person in the world who loved me unconditionally. And I threw all of that love away for nothing." For a brief moment, I saw the little boy he had once been, the child who would run to me with scraped knees and broken toys, completely trusting that I could fix anything. But that little boy had grown into a man who publicly humiliated me, who stole from his business partners, who built his entire life on a foundation of lies and fraud. "I'm going to prison," he said, his voice finally breaking. "My attorney says the evidence against me is overwhelming. I'll probably serve at least 4 years." He looked at me with a flicker of desperate hope, as if expecting me to offer some comfort or perhaps a promise to wait for him. Instead, I stepped back and began to close the door. "Dad, please," he said, putting his hand against the doorframe. "I know I can't undo what I did, but can't you find it in your heart to forgive me? Can't we at least try to rebuild something?" I looked at him one final time, at this stranger who was wearing my son's face. "Forgiveness," I said quietly, "is for people who are genuinely sorry for the wrong they have done. You're not sorry for betraying me, my boy. You're sorry you got caught." I closed the door, gently but firmly, and turned the lock. Through the window, I watched him stand there for several long minutes, as if hoping I might change my mind. Finally, he turned and walked away. His shoulders slumped under the weight of a lifetime of consequences he had spent 34 years avoiding. I never saw him again. 2 years have passed since that final conversation on my doorstep. As I recount this, the sun is setting over the gardens my late wife and I planted together 4 decades ago. The roses are in full bloom, their rich fragrance drifting through the open windows of my study. My son was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. The judge, in his sentencing, called his crimes a pattern of deliberate deception that violated the trust of his business partners, his clients, and the very institutions that had tried to help him. He will serve a minimum of 4 years before he is eligible for parole. His wife divorced him before the trial even concluded. I'm told she has already remarried a successful attorney from her father's social circle. She now goes by her maiden name and has instructed her new husband to have no contact whatsoever with her former in-laws, meaning me. Richard, the man my son held up as his ideal, never once visited him in prison, never wrote him a letter, and never so much as acknowledged his existence after his arrest became public knowledge. He demonstrated precisely the kind of practical wisdom I wish I had possessed 30 years earlier. But I harbor no regrets about the path I ultimately chose. You see, revenge is not about hatred. It is about restoring balance. For 34 years, I had allowed my son to take without giving, to receive without appreciating, and to destroy without ever having to rebuild. I had enabled his worst instincts, all in the name of paternal love. The dinner that night, when he praised another man as the father he wished he had, was not the beginning of my anger. It was the end of my denial. I could have continued to enable him, to bail him out of his troubles, to pretend that his problems were merely temporary setbacks rather than fundamental character flaws. Many fathers would have done exactly that. But enabling someone's destructive behavior is not love. It is cowardice, disguised as compassion. Real love sometimes means allowing the people you care about to face the full and unvarnished consequences of their choices. Real love means refusing to shelter them from the storms they create for themselves. I think about this often as I sit here in my study, surrounded by the books and art my wife and I collected during our 40-year marriage. I think about the business we built together, the foundations we laid, and the legacy we created through hard work and integrity. My son wanted to inherit that legacy without earning it. He wanted the respect that comes with success, without being willing to do the work that creates success. Most of all, he wanted to believe that being born into a life of privilege meant he would never have to face the consequences of his actions. I taught him otherwise. The 7-0 I used to transfer to him each month, the money I had foolishly called helping, now funds a scholarship at the local community college. It provides assistance to students who demonstrate both academic promise and legitimate financial need. Unlike my son, they are required to maintain good grades and perform community service to keep their funding. They earn what they receive. What a novel concept. I have also established a small foundation that provides legal assistance to small business owners who have been defrauded by dishonest contractors. It's my own way of helping to repair some of the damage my son caused to innocent people who had the misfortune of trusting him. These charitable endeavors bring me a satisfaction that 34 years of enablement never could. Sometimes, late at night, letters arrive from the prison. I recognize his handwriting on the envelopes, the same careful script I once praised when he was a child just learning to write his name. I don't open them. Instead, I file them away, unread, in a box in my attic. Perhaps one day, years from now, when enough time has passed and enough genuine change has occurred, I might become curious about their contents. But that day is not today, and it may never come. I am 67 years old now, and I have learned something important about the nature of love and loss. Losing a child to death is a tragedy beyond words. But losing a child to their own choices, watching them slowly become someone you can neither recognize nor respect, that is a different kind of grief entirely. The child I raised, the little boy who once brought me dandelions and called them flowers, was gone long before his arrest. He was lost to entitlement, to greed, and to the foolish belief that his father's love meant he could treat me with contempt. The man in prison is a stranger who happens to wear my son's face. I mourn the child I lost, but I feel no obligation to the stranger. People in our social circle occasionally ask about him. I tell them simply that we are estranged and that some relationships cannot survive certain betrayals. Most people understand without requiring further elaboration, and those who don't are not people whose opinions matter to me. I have my health, my independence, my dignity, and my peace. I have friends who respect me, charities that benefit from my support, and gardens that bloom more beautifully with each passing year. I gave my son life. I gave him love. I gave him every opportunity to become a man of honor and integrity. In return, he gave me shame, disappointment, and public humiliation. So, I took back what was rightfully mine, the power to decide how his story would end. And in my version of his story, there was never going to be a happy ending. He thought words cost nothing when he praised another man as the father he wished he had. But words, as he learned far too late, can be the most expensive currency of all. I sleep peacefully at night, secure in the knowledge that justice was served and balance was finally restored. Some might call what I did cruel. I call it honest. The truth is often brutal, but it is always necessary. And the truth is this: I am no longer anyone's father. I am simply Walter Terry, a man who refused to be anyone's fool twice. Walter's journey from betrayal to balance is a powerful reminder that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. If his story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength in the face of disrespect, show your support by liking this video. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own power and worth. And to ensure you don't miss more stories of resilience and justice, be sure to subscribe to Hidden Wounds. Thank you for joining us.